You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Coming up on today's programme, Labour pledges a huge increase in climate spending, promising £28 billion a year in extra cash to help turn the UK economy green. On the verge of government, Germany's Green Party emerges as the kingmaker after finishing third in the Bundestag election. And not giving up yet, Insulate Britain protesters target Heathrow in a return to the M25 and a breach of a High Court injunction. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and challenge those coming up with the solutions. Now, Labour has promised to invest tens of billions of pounds more every year to help protect the UK from climate change and turn the country's economy green. That pledge, which was made by the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves and was immediately welcomed by environmental groups, would quadruple the amount currently spent by the government and throws down the gauntlet to the Conservatives ahead of their party conference and COP26.
I can announce today Labour's climate investment pledge. An additional £28 billion of capital investment in our country's green transition for each and every year of this decade. I will be a responsible Chancellor. I will be Britain's first Green Chancellor.
Well, let's take a look at Labour's 10-year plan in more detail then. And the party has promised to invest in the green industries of the future. Now, that means more gigafactories to build batteries for electric vehicles. Also, more money for the offshore wind sector, with Labour saying that it would make sure that turbines are made in Britain. There'd also be a focus on green jobs, and Labour has promised to support workers through the green transition and retrain them for low-carbon jobs. And the party has pledged to invest up to £3 billion to decarbonise the UK steel industry. Well, the steel industry decarbonisation plans were announced at conference by the Shadow Business Secretary, Ed Miliband, who I spoke to earlier. I began by asking him how affordable Labour's green investment pledge is.
It is absolutely affordable, and you know the unaffordable choice is not to invest. Because if we don't invest in tackling the climate crisis, we will store up massive costs for the future, for future generations, as they have to cope with the appalling consequences of climate change. And if we do make these investments, and I was talking about this yesterday in relation to the steel industry, it can create hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of jobs across our country in helping to build the economy of the future, in our manufacturing industry, in creating the green spaces that we need, retrofitting and insulating homes. This is about the economy of the future. It's absolutely the right thing to do. It's what Joe Biden, President Biden, is seeking to do in the United States. I think it's a bold, imaginative and really important move that Rachel Reeves has announced today.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the money, because yesterday you announced £3 billion for the steel industry to decarbonise that particular industry, which may be great for the planet, but there is a price to pay, isn't there? People are already facing higher taxes. Under Labour, they'd have to go up even more, wouldn't they?
Well, no, what we're saying is it's right to borrow to invest. So take the steel industry, really important industry. It's a strategic industry for our national security. It's the foundation of our manufacturing industry. The best estimates are it will cost £6 billion to make this industry a green industry, because at the moment it's responsible for more than 10% of our manufacturing emissions. Now, we could decide not to have a steel industry, which means that tens of thousands of people will lose their jobs. Or we can decide, as the choice Labour's made, to do a partnership with the private sector to invest for the future, as other countries are doing, and we can have a clean, green steel industry. And I think that's the right choice. It's the right choice for our communities, it's the right choice for our economy, and it means we don't end up relying on imported steel from countries like China.
But ultimately, we'll have to pay for it. And also, it can't happen overnight, can it? Decarbonising a whole industry may be the right thing to do, but we have to take it very delicately, the same as transitioning out of fossil fuel industries, or jobs will go. There are so many jobs tied up in these industries.
Well, look, you are right about that, definitely. And, you know, I think what's important from Labour this week is it's about a plan for the future. It's about a long-term plan. And goodness knows, when we see some of the chaos that this government is presiding over, our country needs a long-term plan. You're right, it's not going to happen overnight. It's a decade-long plan. It's a decade-long plan that Rachel Reeves has announced today. It's the same that I announced yesterday in relation to the steel industry. And it's about working with business. We have many great businesses in our country. And you know what they're crying out for? I see this as Shadow Business and Energy Secretary. They're crying out for a sense of a plan. They're crying out for a sense of a framework and a sense of certainty. And that's what Labour is providing.
Ed Miliband, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
And you can watch my full interview with Ed Miliband, including his thoughts on the government's planning for COP26 on our YouTube channel. Now, at one point during the German election campaign, the Green Party was leading the polls. Now, with that in mind, you may have thought that yesterday's vote, in which the Greens finished third, would have been a disappointment. But Germany's political system means that along with the Liberal Free Democratic Party, they're all but certain to be kingmakers in the new government. Now, the centre-left SPD won the largest share with around 26% of the vote. Now, the party managed to edge out the CDU, that's Angela Merkel's party, which ended up on 24%. And that means that either the SPD or the CDU would need to form a coalition in order to take office. And it's all but certain that one of them will form that coalition with both Annalena Baerbock's Green Party and the FDP, led by Christian Lindner, which came in fourth. Now, it would either be what's become known as the traffic light coalition because of the party colours, with the SPD's leader, Olaf Scholz, or the Jamaica coalition, that's green, black and yellow, with the CDU's candidate, Armin Laschet. Well, our Euro correspondent Adam Parsons is in Berlin for us. So, Adam, is it inevitable that the Greens will make up part of the coalition? And if so, what impact might that have on Germany's green direction?
I think it is pretty much certain that the Greens are going to be part of a coalition, and they will use that to try and exert influence. As you said, this is going to be a protracted bout of horse trading. I think both the SPD and the CDU, those two big parties, are going to do everything they can to woo the Greens into coalition, and that will involve offering them seats. Already a suggestion that those might involve Annalena Baerbock, maybe going to the foreign ministry. And the other Green leader, Robert Habeck, tonight rumours that he might be offered the position as Vice-Chancellor. So these are serious concessions, but it's going to be difficult because it will also involve, as you said, the FDP, who we often refer to as Liberals. Actually, they're quite, in some way, economic terms, quite conservative. They want to see the purse strings being kept quite tight. They may not want to embrace the Greens' plans for considerable expenditure. It makes for a tough round of negotiation. But the Greens are right in there, and this was the reflections of Annalena Baerbock about what sort of government she might want to see.
We made clear that we want real change, we want real fresh wind, and each party now has to make its decision about what it wants to bring to the government table. And these will be the results that will present themselves in the coming days.
I think the more natural partnership for the Greens is with the SPD. But for the Free Democrats, the FDP, it's probably more natural to go in with the CDU. And yes, there are a lot of three-letter acronyms going around at the moment. It's all very uncertain. The one thing I think you can bet on is that this won't happen quickly. There is every chance that come the end of this year, Angela Merkel may still be Chancellor and the negotiations might still be going on.
Adam, thanks very much indeed. And well done with those acronyms. I think you got them all right there. Thank you. So let's take a look at some of the day's other climate news now. And Australia's Prime Minister has signalled he may not attend COP26 in November as his government faces criticism from environmentalists for its poor climate record. In an interview, Scott Morrison said he hadn't made any final decisions on attending. Australia hasn't yet committed to reaching net zero by 2050, despite the country being the highest per capita carbon emitter amongst the world's richest nations. The world's poorest countries have also said they may not be able to attend COP. The least developed countries group expressed concern that delegates from 25 countries may not meet visa requirements or be able to cover all the quarantine costs. The UK government insists it's planning to go ahead with the conference despite calls to postpone it. Power cuts to meet government energy use targets have forced some Chinese factories to shut down and have left households in the dark. China has vowed to cut energy intensity by around 3% in 2021 to help meet its climate goals, although only 10 of 30 mainland regions managed to meet the targets in the first half of the year. Now, Insulate Britain climate protesters don't appear to be giving up without a fight. When the government obtained a High Court injunction last week banning them from blocking the M25, they turned their attention to the port of Dover. But today, 53 demonstrators were arrested after they returned to the M25 in breach of that injunction and blocked an approach to Heathrow. Sky's Shaman Freeman-Powell was there.
It's 8 o'clock on Monday morning. This junction on the M25 would usually see thousands of motorists. But today, Insulate Britain are back in town, determined to cause disruption. It's the sixth time in just 2 weeks they've pulled this stunt.
Everything else has been tried, sadly, and everything else has failed.
But this time, the police have had enough, arresting 53 people over the course of a few hours and trying to prevent the chaos. It comes after an injunction was granted to National Highways last week, but that didn't seem to discourage them.
The protesters out here today are risking their freedom as breaking a High Court injunction comes at a cost. But the protesters say they're more afraid of climate change than they are of jail and will continue doing these protests until they think the government has heard them.
I'm 44 from Dorset and I'm a scientist. I'm risking losing everything I have, like financially, like friends, my career, my liberty. I'm risking going to prison today, and that's how strongly I feel about this. And there's many of us here, there's over 40 of us here today, and we're not going to be deterred by injunctions, whatever they throw at us, because this problem is more serious. What's coming is more serious.
The message from Insulate Britain is clear. They want the government to insulate British homes, starting with social housing, by 2025. The government are also clear. They want to stop the disruption, starting now. Shaman Freeman-Powell, Sky News.
Well, do stay with us. Coming up after the break, I'll be joined by Jen Allan, lecturer at Cardiff University, and Mike Berners-Lee, a leading expert on carbon footprinting. They're standing by. We're going to be discussing if COP26 can be a success without the Australian Prime Minister and how important is individual sustainability. That's coming up.
Well, Luke got furloughed. He was my husband around about the end of last year, October, November time. And within that time frame, he developed a gambling disorder. I didn't know about any of this until Luke had sadly taken his own life. 3 weeks later, I received his phone and I was able to log into certain things, and slowly I then started to get a picture of what had happened, and he had developed that gambling disorder, like I said. Looking further into his accounts, free bets had been dropping in at times when he'd put money in and he'd lost it. He'd lost quite a lot of money, and then a free bet went in, and then Luke would then get another loan, put that in, lose it, the money had gone, another free bet had go in, and it kind of developed and just progressed basically until he lost control and he just couldn't take it anymore. It was so difficult because that first 3 weeks of him passing away, obviously when someone takes their own life, you do question yourself. You think, well, you know, what did I do? The kids were doing the same thing. We've got 2 children together. His family were all questioning what we'd done, what had happened. And it was literally when we got his phone back, the police gave me his phone and I was able to log into certain accounts, his PayPal. The money was going from PayPal into gambling accounts. I don't look at the money situation, to be fair, because he lost his life. It was a lot of money. It was not affordable, and it was why he was funding it with loans, because he couldn't afford it. It wasn't something he could use his wages on. Gambling is a really harmful product. It's addictive. It's more addictive than class A drugs such as heroin, and you can lose everything within minutes. So yeah, the free bets, it's an inducement that is just so unnecessary. I feel like they just shouldn't be available. I mean, luckily I've been really looked after by a charity called Gambling with Lives. They have been amazing and they have really taken care of me. Every day is hard, and every day I'm going to have to live with the fact that he's no longer here.
We don't understand that every lake or a pond is a habitat in itself, which houses frogs, snakes, crabs, turtles, birds, so many different life forms. Human beings directly depend on underground water source, so a lake or a pond is necessary to replenish these groundwater resources.
Did you know that driving us to school creates extra toxic air at drop-off and pick-up times?
Tuesday will start dry through some central and eastern parts, but heavy showers spreading up from the southwest will merge together to give some more persistent rain for many central areas. Parts of northern Scotland, parts of the southeast will stay dry through the day, but it's going to be cooler still with a top temperature of around 17 degrees Celsius, 63 degrees Fahrenheit, and certainly the afternoon is looking very wet and very windy with localised gales. So once again, air pollution levels are likely to be low right across the country.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. And we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day now with Jen Allan, lecturer at Cardiff University and lead expert of carbon footprinting, and professor at Lancaster University, Mike Berners-Lee. So welcome to both of you. Good to see you here tonight.
Thank you.
Now then, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has said he's yet to decide whether he'll be attending COP26, the UN climate change conference, in November. And he joins the likes of China's President Xi Jinping, who's also yet to confirm if he'll be attending the summit in Glasgow. So without leaders of the world's biggest countries, how much could the summit achieve? Well, let's discuss this now. Mike Berners-Lee, to you first of all. Does it really matter if the likes of Scott Morrison or Xi Jinping are actually there in person? They'll have delegations in Glasgow, won't they? Do you need the people themselves there?
Well, possibly, not quite necessarily, but it's an important opportunity to send out a message about how much you care about this huge issue. And here we are in a climate emergency. And just to be clear, nobody should be giving any time of day to any politician that doesn't take climate really, really seriously and show coherent policies that demonstrate that they mean it, and least of all voting for them. So, I think it's sending out certainly the wrong message for sure.
Jen Allan, do you agree with that? I mean, how important do you think it is symbolically that leaders are actually there having face-to-face meetings? They're there in person.
It's actually fairly rare that we will see heads of state show up at a climate meeting, and sometimes they've been pretty counterproductive. So maybe conversely, this shows that they have to deny the invitation. So it shows that COP is a chance to put public pressure and political pressure on leaders. And so maybe that function of COP is actually working because we're talking about these major emitters that may not send their leaders. We still need their pledges to be updated, but, that could be an email.
Well, that's interesting. And in fact, as you say, it's not just about turning up, it's what's decided there, isn't it? Let's take a look at what the UN head has said. He said, either we're united or we're doomed. So what do you think, Mike? It's not just about persuading world leaders to turn up, it's getting consensus when they're there. So how do you do that?
Well, I mean, the quote you've just given sums up the big picture on what the situation we've got now. So either humanity is going to learn to cooperate at the global level quickly, far better than it's ever done before, or it's pretty clear that we're going to head to a pretty dark place in the reasonably near future. So that is that's the sort of top line of it. So how do we get about that cooperation? One of the things is we need to find a way of this working for everyone and all states. And one of the things that it would be really helpful to give the COP its best chance would be to at least be sending out messages that we care about each other and that we cooperate. So, for example, how we deal with the vaccines in the pandemic, would be one way that we could be sending out messages that we are capable of looking out for each other and coming to arrangements that everyone can live with. At the end of the day, we're almost certainly going to need a carbon price to keep the fuel in the ground. And somehow that price needs to be implemented in such a way that, as I say, everybody can live with it.
Do you think that's right? Some kind of carbon price? Do we need some kind of stick as well as a carrot to get consensus, do you think, at COP26? Jen, is that important? That's the way to go?
There's very few sticks in global cooperation, I'm afraid. I think we need to start looking beyond COP26. And what we're seeing is climate being woven into other areas of global cooperation, like security announcements that were made recently. So we can start realizing that just like the pandemic has influenced so many parts of our lives, climate change is going to do the same thing. And it's going to touch on many areas of cooperation at the global level. And we're going to have to start building incentives to act on climate into trade agreements, into security agreements, into humanitarian and food-related agreements. And that will increase the pressure to act on climate, because if we don't, then all of those other agreements will start to fail.
OK, let's move on to our next subject now, shall we? Because the energy and supply crisis has once again demonstrated how easy it is for our lives to be disrupted by hitches in the supply chain. So is consumer behaviour part of the solution? And would living more sustainably help resolve those big international supply chain issues? Jen, to you first of all. So we are experiencing various supply issues. So is there a green route out of this? And is there a way that consumers can help themselves?
I think consumers are going to have to get used to this. Global supply chains are only as strong as the weakest link. They're a chain like anything else. And climate change is going to lead to extreme weather events, droughts, and other shortages. So it might not be that we can green our way out of this or that consumers will just learn to do better. It's that we're going to have to learn to be more resilient, and we're going to have to learn to deal with shortages popping up.
Do you agree, Mike, that we've just got to get our heads around it? Or is there something that we can do? I mean, everyone talks about shopping locally. I know there's one interesting statistic. Local deliveries emit less than half as much CO2 per item than online-only retailers. So can we take actions that will help ourselves?
Well, it's a bit of both. And there's definitely things that we can do as individuals and as a society to alleviate some of the problems that Jen's talking about. So, for example, the less energy we need to consume, the less we're going to be reliant on energy sources, some of which might come from other countries. The more of our own food we can produce ourselves, the less we'll be interrupted by supply chain problems. And, the less we get through, tons of material goods, we take some of the pressure off the system. But there's no doubt that, we need to change the way we live quite a bit. Most of the time we can do that in a way which, if we're smart about it, we can actually use it as an opportunity to improve the quality of our lives. It's not like wearing a hair shirt, but we do need to be and we change habits a bit.
Yeah, Jen, just a quick thought on that. It's got to be in people's interests, hasn't it? Because globalisation is out there. There's no putting that back in the tin, is there? Do people need to be motivated in some way to do the right thing?
I think people need to be motivated, but I think we also have to realize that everything Mike was just talking about is a systemic change. It's dealing with how we grow our food, how we move goods around the world, how we produce, how we consume. And that goes beyond what an individual can do in their own personal lives. It doesn't mean we're powerless, and there's always things that we can do. Okay. It does mean that we still have to keep thinking about how we can systematically tackle the climate crisis in a way that will be green and productive.
We must leave it there, I'm afraid. I can see you nodding, though. Mike Berners-Lee, thanks very much indeed. And Jen Allan, thanks to you as well. Well, that's everything from us for today. On tomorrow's show, I'm going to be joined by Dr. Cici Hu from the University of Oxford's Environmental Change Institute and the environmental consultant Richard Blagg. But do stay with us. Sky News Tonight is up next with all the top stories with Dermot Munn. And do stay with us.